There is something strange about a defeat you can see coming from 1,000 years away. Most disasters arrive as a surprise. This one didn't. The Norse gods knew exactly how their story would end, and they showed up for the ending anyway. Sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't the one where you don't see the ending coming. It's the one where you see it perfectly clearly and still walk toward it anyway. That's a strange kind of failure. Not blindness, but something closer to surrender dressed up as acceptance. What makes this stranger than ordinary denial is that denial, at least, requires you to look away. This required the opposite, staring directly at the ending, cataloging it in detail, and walking toward it with open eyes. We assume that seeing a disaster coming is the hard part, that once you know what's ahead, you'll obviously act to stop it. Most warnings in life are vague enough that this excuse almost makes sense. Of course you didn't act. You weren't sure. The signal was noisy. But knowing and preventing are two completely different skills. Sometimes the clearest warning in the world isn't followed by action. It's followed by a strange kind of calm. The sense that since the outcome is already written, there's nothing left to do but watch it arrive. This is a harder problem than ordinary denial, because there's no ignorance to blame. The information was there. The understanding was complete. And still, nothing changed. This is the prophecy of Ragnarök, told to Odin himself, chief of the Norse gods, by a seer who could read the fate written into the world. She told him everything. Who would die, who would kill them, how the sun and moon would be devoured, how the seas would rise, how the final battle would end with nearly every god dead on the field. There was no ambiguity in this prophecy, no chance it was a misreading. The gods knew the ending before the story had even reached its middle. The prophecy named names. Odin would be killed by the wolf Fenrir. Thor would kill the serpent Jormungandr and die from its venom moments later. Loki and Heimdall would kill each other. Every major figure in the Norse pantheon had their ending written down in advance, with no ambiguity about the outcome. This wasn't a vague sense of dread or an omen open to interpretation. It was closer to a finished script, handed to the actors before the play began. So what did they do with this knowledge? They armed themselves. They gathered warriors. They prepared in every visible way for the fight that was coming. Odin spent ages gathering the souls of fallen warriors into Valhalla, training them for a single purpose: to fight at his side when Ragnarök finally arrived. Resources, time, and effort were poured into this preparation on a scale that suggests the gods took the threat with total seriousness. But preparation and prevention are not the same thing. Every step the gods took was about meeting the ending well, not about finding a way to avoid it. The prophecy had been treated almost from the moment it was spoken as a fact about the future, rather than a warning that still had room to be acted on differently. Nobody asked the seer if the prophecy could be changed. Nobody sought a way to kill Fenrir before he grew large enough to kill Odin, even though the wolf was, for a time, young enough to bind and contain. The gods did try to restrain him, but having succeeded once, they treated the danger as managed rather than ongoing, and stopped looking for a permanent solution. When the battle finally came, it unfolded almost exactly as the prophecy described. Odin fell to the wolf Fenrir. Thor killed his ancient enemy and died from its poison 9 steps later. One by one, the gods met the fates that had been spoken aloud, in detail, long before any of them had picked up a weapon. They fought bravely. They fought exactly as well as legend says they did. And none of it changed the outcome by even a single line of the original prophecy. There's something almost unbearable in how precisely it matched the forecast. Not one god escaped their named fate. Not one outcome shifted from what the seer described centuries before the first sword was drawn. The preparation had been thorough, courageous, and entirely beside the point. So why does clear knowledge of a coming collapse so often produce preparation for the ending instead of an attempt to change it? Here's what's actually happening. Once a warning becomes vivid and detailed enough, it starts to feel less like a possibility and more like a fact that's already happened. That feeling quietly shuts down the part of you that would normally search for an alternative. Because you don't search for ways to avoid something your mind has already filed away as settled. With that search switched off, all of that feeling quietly shuts down the part of you that would normally search for an alternative. Because you don't search for ways to avoid something your mind has already filed away as settled. With that search switched off, all of the energy that could have gone toward prevention goes toward preparation instead. And once it's channeled that way, you don't notice the difference until you're standing on the battlefield you built for an ending you never actually tried to stop. There's a second layer to this worth naming. The more detailed a forecast is, the more impressive and convincing the preparation around it tends to look. Valhalla, the gathered warriors, the readiness on display. That visible effort can feel like a substitute for prevention, simply because it requires real work and real resources. It's easy to mistake the appearance of seriousness for the presence of a solution. This is the Ragnarök pattern, and it runs the same way every time. A warning becomes vivid enough that it feels less like a possibility and more like a settled fact. That feeling quietly shuts down the search for an alternative. You don't look for ways to avoid something you've already filed away as certain. With that search switched off, energy that could go toward prevention goes toward preparation instead. And you don't notice the difference until you're standing in the exact scenario you built defenses for, instead of the one you could have stopped. Here's the whole pattern in one line. Certainty about how something ends quietly replaces the search for whether it has to. Ragnarök isn't a metaphor for this, it's the first version of it. Every collapse that was clearly forecast and met with preparation instead of prevention runs on the exact same pattern. You don't need a myth to see this pattern. It shows up anywhere a clear forecast gets answered with readiness instead of redirection. A company sees a market shift coming years in advance, builds contingency plans for the decline, and never seriously asks whether the core business itself could change direction instead. A person watches a relationship or a habit head toward a predictable, well-understood ending and spends their energy bracing for the impact rather than asking what could be done differently right now. A government sees a demographic or economic trend coming decades out, commissions reports confirming exactly what was expected, and builds elaborate plans to manage the consequences rather than altering the policies that produced them. In every case, the structure is identical to the myth. The certainty of the forecast became the reason nothing else was tried. Two real examples make this easy to see. Kodak's own engineers invented the digital camera in 1975. The company knew, decades in advance, that digital photography would eventually replace film. Internal research and leadership discussions confirmed it repeatedly. But protecting the wildly profitable film business took priority over fully committing to the future they had already seen. Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Blockbuster saw streaming and online rental coming too, and even built a real strategy to compete with Netflix that started gaining traction. But internal resistance, investors uneasy about the cost, franchisees protecting their stores, pulled the strategy back before it could fully take hold. A third pattern shows up in financial markets before major crashes. In the years leading up to 2008, multiple analysts published detailed warnings about mortgage-backed securities and unsustainable lending. The warnings weren't ignored entirely. Many institutions hedged, built reserves, and prepared contingency plans. Far fewer asked whether the underlying lending practices themselves should stop. Preparation for the crash absorbed the energy that might have gone toward preventing it. None of these failures came from ignorance. They came from treating a forecast as a fixed ending rather than a fork still open to a different choice. Here's the paradox underneath this. The clearer the forecast, the more it can feel like fate rather than a fork in the road, even though a detailed warning is, in practice, more actionable than a vague one, not less. The very clarity that should make change easier is often what makes it feel impossible. But there is one thing that decides whether this happens to you: whether the people who can see the ending have any actual power to choose a different path, or only the power to prepare for the one already written. The Norse gods could see Ragnarök perfectly, but Norse fate itself was considered fixed. There was structurally no alternative path available to them. Kodak and Blockbuster did have other paths. Paths some of their own people identified and tried to take. This distinction matters more than it first appears. Before treating any ending as settled, the real question isn't how clearly can I see this coming, but does the path I'm on actually have a fork in it, or have I simply stopped looking for one? The difference between a myth and a missed opportunity is whether the door was ever actually open. After Ragnarök, in most versions of the myth, a new world rises from the wreckage, green, fertile, and led by gods who weren't around to ignore the warning the first time. This is Mnemarch. We look at the patterns behind human behavior, the same mistakes repeating, whether the costume is a myth, a market, or a memory. Subscribe if this is the kind of thing you think about. There's another one next week.